Hey, it's Zack, and I'm back with another episode of Elevate and Accelerate. And today I'm really excited to talk with you about a very important topic. So, being a parent myself, not yet to teens, I understand the struggles and the value of wanting to be a really good parent. And a lot of times we hear how difficult it is to be a parent to teens. And so, joining me today is Kristina Nation, who is an expert in helping parents navigate what it's like to parent teens, but not just teens, teens battling depression. She's a sought after author, speaker, and a parent herself. And she's the creator of the Everyday Grace Parenting Program. She comes with over a decade of experience, and I am so excited to be talking with her today about a very important topic, and that's our kids. Kristina, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, look, I mean, today's an exciting day for a number of different reasons. I mean, depending on when you're watching this, Kristina has a brand new book that's out called The Power of Everyday Grace: Parenting Teens with Depression. So, congratulations on your new book and all the wisdom that you share in that.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited. It's finally out after 2 years of hard work.
Well, look, I had the opportunity to read this book, and I'm really excited to talk with you not only about the insights that you share throughout it, but your own personal journey that led you to a place of not just wanting to be a good parent, but helping other parents be good parents, be great parents, even, and especially in dealing with kids that are and teens that are battling depression. So, before we kind of jump into what led to the writing of this book and the story of your daughter, kind of share with us a little bit of what your journey was like. I know that you shared in the book that you grew up with a mom who was struggling with bipolar, and so what kind of sent you on the journey of wanting to learn how to help parents and how to navigate family situations like this in the first place.
Yeah, so growing up, my mom did struggle with bipolar, and so it was kind of chaotic childhood. When she was healthy, she was an amazing, loving, nurturing mother. But when she was struggling with mania, especially, things became very chaotic and scary. And a lot of times I ended up having to kind of be the parent role and take care of her, um, and kind of keep me and my younger brother safe as well. And also going through that experience, I wanted to learn as much about what was going on for her and her mental health. So I spent so much time reading all the psychology texts and books that I could from a very young age, learning as much as I could so that I could best support my mom. And through that time, I also realized that, bipolar is a genetic disorder and that there would probably be a good chance that my own children would struggle with their mental health. And so that was always kind of in the back of my mind as well. And so from a very young age, I started thinking about how can I prevent this for myself, for my future children, and which is why I continued to learn as much as I could.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really stood out in the reading of your book was how genuine you were, right? It wasn't just that you were writing down information that you had read in another book or from, the knowledge that you've gotten just from schooling and other things. I mean, it was real experience that you could feel in the pages, right? Not only just in that you shared your story in every chapter, and kind of what you and your daughter had gone through and what you had to do to accomplish the task you had set out to, but it was just very clear that it came from your heart, which was the first thing that really stood out to me. And one of the things that I really loved was that in most of the chapters, if not all of the chapters, you had this section that was Carissa's take,
Mhm.
which is your daughter, right, who was battling with depression in her teenage years. And so, I just thought that was so cool that not only are we hearing from you and your perspective of what that was like, but then you get to hear of how that impacted her as she's looking back on what life was like and what she was going through, which I just thought was so cool. It makes it such a personal work. And I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. That's absolutely my favorite part of the book is her take. I think that's so important for parents not to only hear from another parent that's been through it, but the child, the teen, right? How did those different tools land for them? So thank you. My favorite part.
So look, I mean, you're a mom of five, right? But the inspiration of this book seems to really stem from the struggles and achievements and successes that you've had, and what you've had to learn in parenting Carissa through her teenage years and when she was battling with depression. So, kind of talk with me a little bit about what that was like starting as, a positive disciplined parent educator, right? Somebody who, for all intents and purposes, knew what it took to be a good parent, and then having a teenager falling into depression, and having to kind of relearn some of the things and learn new things, to really help her. So kind of walk us through how that happened, and what that was like for you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so by the time that Carissa started struggling, I had already parented my two older boys through adolescence. And, each of my children kind of struggled with their mental health in different varying degrees, right? My eldest son, had a period where he was down for sure. My second son, maybe a little bit more anxiety here and there, or kind of the perfectionism and stuff. But it wasn't until my daughter Carissa became an adolescent and really started struggling. And again, at that time, like you said, I was already a parent educator. I had already studied positive discipline and started teaching parenting workshops all over my area and had implemented the tools in my family and saw great success in the differences it made in my parenting and within our family. Because before positive discipline, I was a very stressed out, overwhelmed single parent who yelled a lot. And so learning
Yeah.
positive discipline really came at a time where my eldest was entering the teen years. And so it was very much needed. I was like, what was working when they were young is no longer working. I need some new tools. And the more I learned, the more I realized how much I really needed to learn about different parenting tools and strategies. And a lot of that came to learning how to calm down that instant reaction and be more mindful and conscious in my responses instead of just yelling. So it definitely was a huge shift for me in my parenting, and also the difference it made in my family and my relationships with my kids was so amazing. So by the time that my daughter was a teen, I was like, okay, I got this parenting stuff down. I got the teen years down. I'm teaching other parents. This is awesome. And then she started struggling. And I quickly realized that all the parenting classes and tools did not prepare me for parenting a teen with depression. And so I embarked on a journey of learning more skills, learning more tools, and reaching out to my own parent coaches for support.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really permeated its way through the entirety of the book, is this idea of mindfulness and slowing down and being aware and having good conversations, right? And all of those things that, I know as a parent in the moment are extremely difficult. Like my oldest is 8 right now. But still, like, with my 6-year old, even, and even my 4-year old, there's these moments of power struggles where they're
Mhm.
trying to express their independence, and I'm trying to keep them within the confines of what I think, right? And so it's like we butt heads in some ways, and it's difficult, to overcome some of that. So my question to you is, and I think what a lot of things that I've heard in sort of my own upbringing and the things that I grew around was a lot of these misconceptions around positive parenting. where it's centered a lot around what seems like from the outside of enabling versus empowering. Right. And I know that you create that distinction within your book and talk about it a little bit, but I'd love to hear from you. Like, what are some of the misconceptions that maybe you're familiar with that parents have walking into this idea of positive parenting? And then how would you kind of create a distinction between empowerment versus enablement?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of people think positive discipline or positive parenting is permissive parenting, um, where it's just you're best friends with your kids and you just give them all this freedom and but it really is the opposite. Well, not the opposite, but very different. It's really about a balance of being kind and firm at the same time. So you don't want all kindness where well, you think of that permissive parenting where you're just you know being best friends and giving them all this freedom and no boundaries and let them do whatever they want. It's definitely not that. You also need the firmness part. So all children need those boundaries and need expectations and need you to hold them accountable. So it's really finding that balance, and like anything in life, right, is the key
It's
is
all about the
finding that
balance.
balance.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that could be the tricky part, and that's actually what I found the most difficult when my daughter was struggling. It was like, okay, what does kind and firm look like when you're talking about
Mhm.
some more serious topics such as what does kind of firm look like when you're talking about a teen smoking and getting high and then driving? What does kind
Mhm.
and firm look like when your child is telling you that they want to end their life? These are some real serious topics that are a lot harder to navigate and find that balance. And that's when I needed to reach out to my parent coaches and other parents that had been through similar challenges and also practice positive discipline. But
Mhm.
positive discipline is all about mutual respect and teaching your teen or your child the skills that they need to grow into successful adults. And so it's all about really empowering them with the skills that they need to navigate life successfully. It is not permissive parenting. And we talk a lot about how to be empowering rather than enabling. A lot of parents nowadays tend to do too much for our kids and kind of rescue them from all of their mistakes and mishaps, and that can really lead to a lot of problems for your teen down the road, like not feeling capable, not having confidence in themselves to have the skills to take care of themselves and do the things that they need to do. So yeah, it's really important to focus on that kindness and firmness at the same time.
Yeah, one of the things that you said in your book was enabling is providing your teen with whatever they need without encouraging them to take ownership or responsibility for their actions,
Yeah.
right? Like, which that ownership and responsibility for their actions is a key point, right? You're not being permissive and just allowing, the consequences to go by or to shield them from the consequences, but rather, the empowering teens is by setting proper boundaries,
Mhm.
expectations, and then that then promotes their responsibility rather than taking away freedom, which I thought was really cool. So, in my own personal experience and growing up, right, and even now as I think about the framework of how I would try to parent my children, it's like I have this idea of discipline for their mistakes requires me to then limit their freedom, taking something away. You're grounded,
Mhm.
you're punished, it's like that's the discipline. But I'm not on the other end of that spectrum helping to promote them taking responsibility. So I would love to hear from you and like how, as a parent, at any stage, whether you already have teens or leading up to it, what are some ways in which we can understand how to better promote our kids taking responsibility as opposed to just having to take away their freedoms and using consequences as a way to hopefully get them to get it right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that question because, yeah, I was the same way and started off parenting in the same way where I was like, oh, you need to ground them. You need to take away the phone. You need to, all these things is
Yep.
the only way to teach them, what is right and what is wrong and how to behave appropriately. But what I learned is that when we impose those type of consequences, what our teens are really focused on is how unfair you are as a parent, how badly
Mm.
you suck, and you just took this away, and that they're this victim. They're not really focused on learning from that,
Mm.
you know, that situation. And
Yeah.
so we're not really having the response that we're hoping to by imposing that consequence. So instead, we want to try to help them process their mistake in a way that's going to help them learn from it. And so by asking those curiosity questions, like, what is your perspective of what happened? What
Mm.
what do you think was the mistake, or what did it cause for this to happen, and how do you feel about it? How do you feel
Mm.
about what happened, or how do you think that maybe you could have done things differently or might want to do differently next time? But really walking them through that process of you know thoughtfully thinking about what happened and what they're learning from it. And what I find is when you do have these conversations, you'll be surprised by how much they really have learned from the experience. And that's the
Mm.
key. That's what we want, right? We want them to learn from their mistakes. We want them
Yeah.
to, learn what is appropriate and not appropriate, and learn from those natural consequences rather than having to impose um, you know more consequences, such as taking things away or sending them to their room, or you know,
Right.
yeah.
Oh, I love that idea of natural consequences and helping them to think through their mistakes. And one of the things that you talk about often is how by doing so, you allow your child to understand that mistakes are just a part of the growing process, right? Which for many of us, we struggle with this fear of failure, right? And
Mhm.
and a lot of that can stem back to this, upbringing, this idea of perfection is the baseline.
Exactly.
This is how you operate. So I like that. And I know in your book you talk about, well, how do we implement consequences, right? And that is one of the things where we're talking about positive. One of the criticisms of positive parenting is this idea that there's only natural consequences and maybe not some of these other ones that you impose, but that's not really the case, right? And I know one of the strategies that you talk about in the last part of your book, when you're coming up with how to comprehend behaviors and effective advocacy, like somewhere in there in those final parts, you were talking about how um, you can come up with contracts,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or different ways in which your child truly understands this is the expectation, and here are the agreed upon consequences for your actions should that not happen. So kind of walk us through a little bit of what that looks like as a tool that you might be able to use to be on the same plane with your teen.
So, what is so important about consequences is to think about, before giving a consequence, is to think about, is it helpful? Is it relatable? Is it respectful? And have I revealed it in advance? And that's key, revealed in advance. That means that ideally we're having these conversations about what possible consequences could be to certain behaviors beforehand. So we're having conversations where you can use the contract. So some good examples for a contract is like when you're first giving your child a phone, right? That's a huge responsibility, of phone. So you want to talk about, what does that look like? What are the expectations of, having the privilege of using a phone? And if those privileges are broken, then what are some possible consequences for that? So having that contract, and what the contract really is just kind of putting on paper that conversation that you're having, you know so the important part is having that conversation. So when it comes to, first giving a phone, when it comes to getting ready to get their driver's license and possibly using the family car, when it comes to, you know going out late and having a curfew, like all of these things we should be talking about in advance. We should be talking about our values around alcohol use, and what those values and expectations are, and what would be some consequences if those expectations aren't met. And then when a mistake is made, then they already are aware of what those possible consequences are going to be. And so that helps them decide, when they're going to decide to do something or not do something. They're going to think over, well, I know this is a possible consequence, right?
Hmm.
And if they
Yeah.
choose to do it anyways, and then you do give out that consequence, well, then they already knew that and they already made that decision. And mistakes are always going to happen. That's how we learn. you know
Hmm.
so just realizing that and following through then with that said consequence.
I appreciate that position and like that understanding of having the conversation beforehand, right? When you can clearly set expectations and the results of either meeting or not meeting those expectations, like, it creates a lot of transparency, right?
Right.
Now, I know one of the things, especially as me as a, thinking of my teen self, I'm thinking I didn't want to talk to my parents. I had no interest in talking to them. So I know in your book you talk through specifically about how you build that type of connection with them, right? I mean, the whole first section of the book is about creating that genuine connection. And one of the things that you talk about is through quality time, right? And so all of this is it sounds like what would be the word, like proactive parenting, right, instead of reacting to the mistakes in the moment, right? And so kind of tell us a little bit of, if I'm a parent with a teen who may be battling with depression, and maybe here's even another place to start, right? So I have a teen who's battling with depression. How do I even begin to understand like what they're going through, right? Like, where's that stemming from? Is this because they're using their phone too much? Like, what do I do as a parent now that I'm thrust into this place where I have no understanding of, how we even got here in the first place?
Yeah. Yeah. Everything that we're talking about when it comes down to parenting really comes down to communication, right? And in order to have that good communication, because like you said, a lot of parents and teens really struggle that their teens aren't opening up, or their teens are, they're having those power struggles, or they're having miscommunications. So the key to having better communication is having a stronger connection. And so that's why it's the very first chapter in the book, because it all comes down to having a strong connection. And a lot of times, when someone is struggling with depression, they're having a lack of connection, whether
Mm,
that's a lack of connection within the family or within their community or spiritually, but somewhere there's a disconnect. And so we want to really focus on growing, nurturing, strengthening that connection. And yes, quality time is one good one. And a lot of times, parents feel like, my kid's a teen, they don't want to spend time with me, or if your teen is struggling with depression, they're self isolating. Like, how do I spend time? And what I always tell parents is, even when it seems like they don't want to spend time with you, they do. It's just,
Hmm.
it's on their terms, right? So it's a matter of figuring out what are they comfortable with, what, how often or for how long, or what do they enjoy, and what are some things that they would like to do with you, and figuring that out, and then making that a part of your routine, and making sure that they know that they are a priority to you. Sometimes, as parents, our kids grow into teens, they seem like they don't want to spend time with us. So we get busy, like, focusing more on our own personal accomplishments. And before we know it, we're just not making them a priority anymore. And they feel that. So
Hmm.
definitely want to, continue giving them what they need in the way that they need it, that's going to be beneficial in really having that strong connection, which is then going to help them feel safe to be able to share with you how they're feeling, what they're thinking, what's going on for them, because that is crucial in supporting your
Hmm.
team with depression. The more that they're able to communicate with you, the better able you are to support them and advocate for them and get them what they need to help them.
Hmm. Yeah, that's such an important part of this whole process, right? Is being able to open up that line of communication. And I know a lot of parents, like, I've heard them say it. I know I feel it for myself. It's this idea of like, I I want my kids to be able to tell me anything,
Right,
um, but at the same time, it's like I also want to be their parent and not just their friend.
right,
And it's striking that balance, as you were saying, of trying to understand, like, well, how do I do that? And I've heard a number of parents who would say something along the lines of, like, let's say their teen or tween is vaping, or smoking in the bathroom, or doing something like that while they're at school or with their friends, and it's kind of like, well, I'd rather them do it here than out there somewhere. I'd rather them do it in my house than opposed to being out there in somebody else's house or driving or whatever. So how do we as parents kind of maybe break into having that conversation with them? How do we start the process of knocking on their door and saying, hey, let's talk about this? And then what are some next steps that we can help to create a good structure for them?
yeah. Yeah, so we definitely, don't want to be in that friend role. We definitely, our kids need us to be the parent. They need
Hmm.
that structure. They need those expectations and boundaries. And we want to always be communicating our values around things such as vaping, marijuana, um, unhealthy sexual behaviors, all of those things. We want to be communicating our values to them, and setting those expectations. Um, so we don't want to allow those things in our home if
Hmm.
that's not something that we value, and not a behavior that we're hoping them to carry on in their lives and in adulthood, right? So instead, we want to communicate our values, but when they do make mistakes, and when they do experiment, and if they are struggling with depression, and so they're using some of these behaviors as a coping mechanism, or avoidance, or escape, then we need to have those serious conversations. But why our kids don't want to come to us, and why they can't talk to us, is because we come off judgmental. We go straight into lecture. And so we need to make sure that when they are making those mistakes, which we know they will, and when they are trying on these things that we don't feel are best for them, and they do come to us with it, or we find out in one way or another, and we have that
Right.
conversation, we're not going to jump into judgment. We're not going to jump into a lecture.
Hmm.
Instead, we're going to connect with them. we're going to listen, right? Listen and ask them clarifying questions, those curiosity questions that, excuse me, we're going to ask them those curiosity questions that help us understand what is going on for them and help them learn from the mistake that they made, right? So,
Mm.
you made this decision to try this out. What was your experience? What did you feel about it? Do you think that's something that you would like to try again? Do you think next time those questions are going to help them really learn from the experience and decide if it's something that they want to continue or not. And again, then you can ask for permission to share your concern, um, and possibly ask if there's additional support that you can provide. A lot of times, if our teen is struggling with depression, they may not have enough healthy coping skills to deal with it. So they go towards unhealthy coping skills, such as self medicating with marijuana or vaping or, uh, excessive video gaming or, such things like
Right.
that. And so, whenever there's a behavior, we got to look at it as communication. And we got to look at it as there is a need that isn't being met, right? So if they're choosing to smoke marijuana, what is the need that they're trying to fulfill? And what are some other ways to meet that need in a healthier way, and giving them the skills to be able to choose healthier coping skills and such. So
So one of the things that you do really well in your book is in every single chapter you give, here's an action step, here's something that you can do, right? You share your story, you provide the information, and here's what you can do next. And you also share the experiences not only of Carissa but of other families who have implemented some of these strategies that you're sharing with, right? And but one of the things that you've done really really well is showing people that it's not just teaching your teen, it's learning it for yourself.
mhm.
And then here's how you do it too. Here's some mindfulness techniques, here are some action steps, here are some things that you can do to build that connection and spend quality time with your teen, right? And so I'd love to hear, like, I know, in talking with you and obviously reading through this book, that you had to learn how to regulate your own emotions in order to help Carissa regulate hers, which she goes on to say was one of the most powerful things that you guys had done together. But kind of walk us through that process of somebody who, one, maybe this is the first time we're even hearing about regulating our own emotions, right? We're used to
Mhm.
yelling, we're used to exploding. That's how our lives were when we grew up. So what's some of the processes and tips that we could start implementing, to be more mindful and self-aware ourselves, so that we can teach our kids and model that for them, in those moments that they need to do it themselves.
Yes, yeah. So like I said, I was a yeller, right? What is yelling? Yelling is a lack of emotion regulation, right? Why
Hmm.
was I yelling? Because I didn't
Guilty.
have the skills to do it differently, to be more conscious and respond more thoughtfully. So positive discipline then gave me the skills to do it differently, to parent differently. But also a huge part of it for me is I was a single parent. I was stressed and overwhelmed. So a big part of it was learning that I didn't have to be superwoman. I didn't have to be the super parent and be the mom and the dad and the grandparent and the booster PTA president and the the
Right.
learning that I was good enough as I was doing my best, and start saying no to some of those things that were not a priority, so that I wasn't as stressed and overwhelmed. So that was key. So self care cannot be emphasized enough how important it is. And like I said, just learning to say no is self care. A lot of people think they have to do these big, extravagant, uh, you know, time consuming, expensive things to implement self care, but that's not the case. Self care can be, eating healthy, exercising, just taking care of our needs, just doing something that we enjoy, even if it's 5, 10 minutes. It could be, doing a 5 minute meditation or just doing some of the mindful activities in my book. Um, just taking some time for yourself and nourishing yourself is
Mm,
so critical. And why it's so important to implement self-care and to practice learning skills for emotion regulation is because number one way to teach our teens is through modeling it ourselves, right?
mm,
So if they are having, trouble regulating their emotions, we have to start with ourselves and what we're modeling. And then we want to help them practice by co regulating. So being
mm,
there, supporting them, walking them through some of those skills and tools, such as deep breathing, such as some grounding exercise. Like, maybe they're having an emotional outburst and you walk them through and just ask them, tell me 5 things you see right now. Tell me 4 things you hear, and walk them through, guide them through that process of, grounding themselves. So that's co regulation. And then
mm,
by modeling and guiding them through the process, you're then teaching them how to regulate themselves, which is critical, critical
mm.
for our teens, for our anyone struggling with their mental health. We need to learn these skills and teach them these skills.
Hmm. Yeah, it's resonating with me in that I remember my own teen years and how volatile they were, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like just emotional outbursts, anger, punching walls, kicking
Mm-hmm.
doors. Like it was, and I can look back on that and say it was just I didn't know what to do with whatever was going on inside of me, and so it became a physical expression of my emotional turmoil, right? But, so here's kind of my question for you as we sort of wrap out this conversation. If I would love for you to, just in my own curiosity, kind of walk me through maybe in a hypothetical situation what that might look like. So let's say I'm a teen and I had a rough day at school, and so I'm coming home, um, and and so I'm really irritable, right? Which is already in a stressful environment. Parents come home, they're stressed out and irritable too, and so there's conflict that's happening, and so then there is a emotional outburst, right,
Mm-hmm.
from the teen. What can we do as a parent when it seems like they are, quite literally pushing us away or slamming their door? Like, how do we know how far to push and how much to kind of give them space, and then enter into that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great example. So if your teen's coming home and they're very irritable, um, some of the things, it's almost like thinking back when they were toddlers, right? What's the number one thing when they're having a outburst? It's, are they hungry? Are they
Mm,
tired? It's the same thing with our teens. Do they need a snack? So you could try offering them a snack. Do they need some time in their rooms to rest? I mean, high school is hard. It is emotionally, physically draining. All that brain power is draining, right?
yeah.
So usually they probably just need some space in their room to decompress. Maybe
Mm,
that means jumping on, scrolling social media or playing a video game or talking to a friend. Maybe it's just, laying down and having a little rest. Maybe you could offer them a snack, but for the most part, I would give them some space.
mm,
Now, if they said some things to you in along the way that were not very kind, then after you give them that space, after they've had some time to decompress, then you can discuss it. That really hurt my feelings earlier when you came home and said and did this. Let's talk about that. I did you have a bad day? Is does something happen at school? Is there something you want to talk about? So have that conversation. Listen. Be a good listener and listen to, just being interested in them and what's going on for them is so important. And then validate, right? Validate their feelings. Man, I hear you. That really sucks. No wonder you were in such a bad mood. What can I do to help you next time? Or what can, how might that end up differently? Or next time you're feeling that way, what are some things you could do that would help you feel better that make so you wouldn't have to lash out? Kind of
Mm.
process that way.
Yeah, and I love that answer. And you mentioned it in your book too. It's seeing behind what's presenting itself. It's like if we address what's on the surface, then our teen feels misunderstood. They don't feel seen. They feel like, and so then you get into that power struggle. You get into that
Mhm.
conflict because they're wanting that connection. They need something, but they're not getting it, like you mentioned with a toddler. And so in our ability to then regulate and then to help co-regulate, we
Mhm.
can see what's going on behind whatever is presenting us in the moment, and really be able to use that to connect with them, right? Which then builds trust, which is something in personal branding that we talk about all the time, right? It's like
Yeah.
in your ability to be able to share that story and to empathize with your clients and your prospects, then you can build that connection and that trust,
Yeah.
right? And that's really what you're doing with your teens too.
I
I love
think
that.
it's important to say too that in that scenario, right? They come home and they're irritated and maybe they say something or do something to you that's unkind. And like you said, you just got home from work. You're stressed. You have a lot on your
Mhm.
mind. So maybe you don't respond the way that you would like. And maybe shout something back. Maybe
Mm.
there is a power struggle. And what I would say in that moment is, have grace for yourself as well. Realize that you're not perfect, you're going to make mistakes, but try to catch as soon as possible. Whoa, maybe I need some time to decompress. Maybe
Mm.
I need some time to implement some self-care so that I can be ready to have this conversation with my teen. So maybe you need to take that 5 minutes to do a quick meditation, a couple of yoga practices, or have some water, or whatever you need to do so that you can respond more effectively as well.
I love that. Well, look, we're at the end of our time here. There's so much more that we could talk about, but thankfully, you cover all of that and more in your book. And kind of walking us through strategies and tips and suggestions and all the things that we would need as parents to not only relate to our teens, but specifically even relate to teens that are battling depression and dealing with the mental health issues. And so, thank you for your time. Thank you for writing the book. If somebody wants to reach out to you or get into contact with you or even pick up a copy, what would be the best way for them to find out more information from you?
Yeah. So the best way would be to go to my website, which is empoweredparenting.family. And there you'll find all kinds of free resources and blogs and more information of ways I offer support. And there will also be a link to the book there. And then the book will be available on Amazon. So please get your copy and please leave a review.
Absolutely. Well, I will be sure to do that. And in final closing here, I think, and I missed this in the earlier parts, but I think it's really important to say, um, developing a support network for you and your teen is extremely important. So it goes beyond just you having to do all of this alone,
Mhm.
but it's the counselors, it's the mental health professionals, it's the student counselors at school, it's whoever you need to include in this process is just as important, right? And that may include a parent coach and some of
Yes.
these other opportunities that are out there for you as a parent.
Yes, definitely. And that is why I wrote the book, for parents to realize that it takes a whole support network to support your teen and to support you and your whole family. When we're dealing with mental health issues, we need a village more than ever.
Well, thank you, Kristina, so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I look forward for more to come, and more people getting to know how to build good, connected, and positive relationships with their teens. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank all of you for joining us today. As always, if you like this, please like, subscribe, share, click all those little buttons, do those things, and continue to keep elevating and accelerating, especially in your life and as it relates to being a parent and working with your teens. And pick up your copy of Kristina's book. You won't regret it. Thank you. Cheers.